The government is not only corrupt, it is morally degenerate. If you're wondering why the United States has 6 to 19 times the per capita incarceration rate of any other Western nation, maybe what I reveal here will provide some insight. Hello, this is Dave from Net4Truth USA. It is March 7th, 2019, and it is now 0440 hours in the morning. I slept all day yesterday, so I'm up. You might say I'm up late, but it's really early. In any event, this information right here is 14 years old. Gives you an idea of how long I've been involved in investigating these sorts of things and why I have so many enemies and why I have so many friends. Thankfully, a hell of a lot more friends than enemies. This is an article titled Veterans Exploited in New York Prisons at Taxpayer Expense. And this was written anonymously by someone at Groveland Correctional Facility in Stony, New York. You can get a PDF copy of the article by clicking on that little box right there. And this is my foreword. Corruption in New York State's prison system is nothing new. The examples you could find with a simple Google search are practically endless. No doubt, such is the case across the country. A few articles posted on this website come up prominently in the search engine listings on this topic. This article was added to this website 10 years after it was originally submitted, along with supporting documentation by an anonymous inmate at Groveland Correctional Facility in Stony, New York, and subsequently published by Justicia, the newsletter of the Judicial Process Commission. I have reproduced the article below, adding footnotes and bracketed comments for clarification and to cite independent sources. Since several inmates at that facility had subscriptions to the Justicia newsletter, a copy of this article found its way into the hands of counselors, namely Mr. Frank Recchio, Mrs. Abigail Kolomic, and Ms. Karen Crawford, and others. Questions that weren't properly answered by these 3 DOCS employees led to allegations of psychiatric incompetence and was reported by the inmates to news agencies, congressmen, senators, and whoever else would listen. Inmates' letters alleging widespread corruption at the Groveland facility went unanswered, save for a single congressman, Congressman Bernie Sanders of Vermont, who initiated an investigation by the Department of Veterans Affairs Inspector General, who partially validated the slew of allegations and issued a report which can be proven to be a cover-up prima facie if the report is read carefully. Now, the picture on the left-hand side here is Groveland Correctional Facility is like 1,700 acres. Is it any wonder that Groveland's secret had been kept since the VRTP program, that's Veterans Residential Therapeutic Program, started, since incentives for signing up in the program were, among other things, segregated housing with other veterans in an open dorm barracks, which had 3 large refrigerators and 2 commercial cooking ovens. Prisoners were cooking ethnic foods, pizza, and rarely ate the garbage served up in the mess hall. Conditions were one step removed from one might expect at club-fed prison. The prison even has a bowling alley, and if you click the link, it takes you to the history of the whole place. The photograph at the left is Attica Correctional Facility in, I think it's Dannemora. VRTP participants were routinely threatened with transfer to other maximum security prisons such as Attica, Auburn, or Sing Sing if they made waves. Shortly after the article below about the VRT program was published, all of the prisoners involved in the DOCS investigation and stirring the turd, so to speak, were given bogus disciplinary reports and were transferred out of Groveland Prison's 1,725 landscaped acres and sent to Attica, Auburn, or other New York DOCS shitholes. There is no doubt in this writer's mind that although the Department of Veterans Affairs Inspector General's investigation resulted in the firing of at least one Veterans Administration employee, because the Department of Veterans Affairs has no jurisdiction in a New York prison, New York DOCS employees involved in the alleged scam were never investigated or prosecuted and are probably still at their scams with other programs sub nom. The corruption exposed at Groveland resulted in the discovery of what can only be called collateral damage in the case of Mr. Stanley, who was mandated by New York State to complete a substance abuse component or alcohol and substance abuse therapy that he was denied access to because he was a veteran in order to get medical treatment for advanced hepatitis C. He had a viral load of over 1 million that he had contracted during his tour in Vietnam over 30 years prior. Mr. Wright was never a drug addict or an alcoholic. The Groveland VRTP staff lied to him and told him and all the veterans he would be covered for earned eligibility. Earned eligibility is a certificate they give you that you are eligible for parole under the VRTP, but the VRT program was never certified by the state, and so when the Veterans Residential Therapeutic Program was dismantled, he was mandated to attend alcohol and substance abuse therapy, but wouldn't live to complete it because he was a late-stage hepatitis C case and being denied medical treatment until he completed a 6-month certified substance abuse program. I felt that this situation was an outrage and unconscionable, since whoever heard of compelling someone to take a 6-month-long therapy program in order to qualify for medical treatment? As ridiculous as it sounds, this is precisely what was happening, and is a matter of public record in the case of Stanley versus Wright, docket number 00CV-6018-FE, Western District, New York, December of 2000. In a brief to the court, Mr. Stanley's attorney wrote, quote, "The treatment of my client violates all standards of decency and is a violation of the Geneva Convention 3 for the treatment of enemy prisoners of war," end quote. Mr. Stanley was released in December of 2000 in time to be home with his family for probably his last Christmas. The prison system in New York, and indeed across the entire country, has become a cesspool of corruption, and the crimes being committed by staff against the prisoners and the abuses that ripple back and forth between the courts and law enforcement rival those committed by the worst offenders locked up behind bars. Indeed, fully 80% of prisoners in this country are behind bars because of the corruption in the system and not for any crime that was committed. With 6 to 19 times the per capita incarceration rate of any Western European nation, the United States has transformed the criminal exploitation of prisoners into an art form. The criminals who work for the state are conveniently immune from criminal prosecution and civil lawsuit due to a little-known thing called qualified immunity. These people are literally above the law, and that article, that link right there, I will leave it in the description. You definitely have to read that. You see that video. I have a video about above the law. But I and others have vowed to repeal this law and institute jail for judges. You can help this effort by signing the petition. If you click on the link, I'll leave that link in the description too. This example is the tip of the tip of the tip of a very large iceberg. When you have a group of people who cannot be prosecuted for their crimes or personally sued for damages as a result of the commission of those crimes, such as false arrest, falsifying evidence, making false allegations, tampering with witnesses, obstruction of justice, or paying off judges, among a myriad of related crimes, you have an environment that is a festering cesspool of lawlessness. Anyone who has had any experience with the police that went as far as the courts, and almost everyone who has had any experience with the great failure of social engineering of family services will tell you not only is the system a total failure, but it is a travesty and a criminal enterprise worse than the mafia. Until everyone, including those in law enforcement and the court system, are treated equally by the law, There is truly no justice in America. Justice depends on which side of the whip you're on. Scrolling down a little further, we have the original article that started off all of this stuff, and it was written by an inmate at Groveland and sent to the Judicial Process Commission. It was titled, Veterans Exploited in New York Prisons at Taxpayer Expense. Published in the January 2001 edition newsletter of the Judicial Process Commission at 285 Ormond Street, Rochester, New York, 14605, and it's reproduced here with permission of the author and the Judicial Process Commission. For years, veterans incarcerated at Groveland Correctional Facility have been told that the Veterans Residential Therapeutic Program here was better than programs run by the Department of Correctional Services, and that participation in that program would satisfy earned eligibility goals. Earned eligibility gives you the right to go to the parole board and be in full satisfaction of all mandated programs. VRTP is an 18-month program, which is 3 times the length of the program run by the Department of Correctional Services. It was supposed to be voluntary, but until recently was not. Vets were told that it was mandatory and that names were removed from facility waiting lists for the 6-month programs every non-vet had access to. 3/27/99, in a memo sent to individual inmates, quote, a decision has been made that successful completion of the VRTP substance abuse component will satisfy your earned eligibility goal. Therefore, your name is no longer on the waiting list for ASAT, or Alcohol and Substance Abuse Therapy, end quote. 6/8/99 memo, posted in the dorms. If you are a veteran and need ASAT or ART, that ART is aggression replacement therapy. A bunch of Hick Farmer, Sigmund Freud wannabes, if I ever heard of it. Unbelievable. The aggression component, you will now meet these requirements through the Veterans Program. Veterans are no longer on the ASAT or ART waiting list. Failure to sign up may result in loss of good time. It turns out that none of the components is recognized by the state of New York, and it is doubtful that completion or enrollment in VRTP means anything to the parole board, since nobody has been paroled from within VRTP to my direct knowledge in over 2 years. I personally know all 80 vets in the dorm. Certificates of earned eligibility are issued, but not a single vet has been paroled, despite the fact that many have clean prior records, most were gainfully employed, and are civilized human beings who gave years of their lives in the honorable service of their country. A letter from Don Little, Program Coordinator, OCS, that's the Occupational something, Office of something. Anyway, doesn't matter. Dated 9/28/2000 states, quote, the substance abuse, ASAT, and the aggression components, ART, are not and have not been recognized as substitutes for the Alcohol and Substance Abuse Program or the Aggression Replacement Training Program. If Veterans Program participants have these needs, they are expected to address them by participating in those specific programs, end quote. This letter, in effect, says that VRTP participants, even if they complete the VRT's 18-month program, the one according to the memo cited was supposed to be in full satisfaction of all mandated programs, will not satisfy their earned eligibility requirements. The programs outside of VRTP were not available to veterans because we were not on the waiting list. Vets were discriminated against because our bodies were needed for VRTP. We were taught in a federally funded through the VA therapy program, which was 3 times longer, but which was never recognized in its 10 years of existence in the facility. VRTP is run by inmate facilitators, except for the sex offender classes attended by both counselors. The materials used have been identified as workbooks adapted from the state of Washington's SAFER program, probably in violation of copyright because SAFER never heard of this facility. And those footnotes, I'll click on the footnotes. SAFER means It has been replaced by other documentation and violence programs. And one inmate at the facility had taken the SAFER course and recognized the workbooks. SAFER was contacted and replied that they never heard of Groveland Correctional Facility and that their workbooks were being used without their permission. Okay, veterans in the program in Groveland feel that although VRTP was intended to help veterans recover their lives and their dignity, it has been responsible for lengthening the prison stay because the programs are not recognized by the state. What are needed are the parole statistics for the men participating in the VRT program in this facility. It is unconscionable that veterans be forced into programs that actually do them harm. The public should demand an investigation into this program. Now we got footnotes up the yin-yang. You can go there and look at, what it means and all that. But the program was investigated, and we have an article here. If I can find a link to it, I'll bring it up. Here's the report. Now the report, a lot of these links don't work, so I have to fix them, and I just don't have the time right now. Okay. This is the memorandum from the Department of Veterans Affairs, date October 31st, 2001. From the Assistant Inspector General for Auditing. Review of hotline complaint VA programs in New York State prisons, report number 01-00290-22. The Office of Inspector General reviewed the following allegations to determine their validity and whether or not corrective actions are needed. Allegation number 1, a registered nurse and other Veterans Integrated Service Network VISN-2 providers may have provided care to veterans incarcerated at a New York State prison which was beyond the scope of care for which they were credentialed and privileged. Allegation number 2, VISN-2 staff was coding the RN sessions with incarcerated veterans as psychotherapy treatments instead of psych education treatments in order to increase the VISN-2 budget. The Department of Veterans Affairs VA funding system, Veterans Equitable Resource Allocation funds psychotherapy treatments at approximately $40,000 per inmate per year. Psych education treatments are funded at approximately $100 per inmate per year, and they're going to say that this is a big mistake. We concluded that the first allegation was partially substantiated. VISN-2 staff conducted a peer review and concluded that the RN provided care outside the scope of care for which he was credentialed and privileged. In other words, he was a registered nurse pretending to be a psychiatrist, and that is grounds for a lawsuit for impersonating a doctor, because a psychiatrist is supposed to be a medical doctor. Freaking believable. Where am I here? We reviewed the RN's documentation of care provided to incarcerated veterans and agreed that the allegation was substantiated. You developed a corrective action plan in response to the peer review report. We suggested that you closely monitor the corrective actions planned to ensure full implementation. We found no evidence that other VISN-2 providers provided care outside the scope of care for which they were credentialed and privileged. What this fails to mention is this guy's been doing his shit from 1988 until the year 2000 when they caught him. The second allegation was not substantiated. We determined that the RN sessions were coded as psychotherapy treatments rather than psych education treatments. We also found, how's that not substantiated? We also found that coding was done by the RN in question, and there was no evidence that VISN-2 staff was involved with the coding errors. However, while some coding errors were made by medical center staff, care provided to VISN-2 incarcerated veterans was not funded at the state rate of $40,000 per inmate per year. We found that Vera overfunding totaling $36,000 occurred for treatment provided to 12 incarcerated veterans as a result of coding errors by medical center staff. Yeah, they had coding errors from 1988 until the year 2000. Never caught it until the inmates caught them. Vision 2 management reported these coding errors to the Assistant Deputy Undersecretary for Health and indicated its intention to return the funding to the Veterans Equitable Resource Allocation System for the redistribution nationally. Thank you for your cooperation. If you have any questions, please contact me. Blah, 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 blah. Unreal. And it's signed and, all that. OIG review of hotline complaint, VA programs in New York State prisons. Hotline complaint number 2001 HL0066. Audit project number 2001-0020-R1-0065. Blah, blah. Summary. The Office of Inspector General conducted a review at Department of Veterans Affairs, Healthcare Network, Upstate New York, Veterans and Integrated Service Network, and VA Medical Center, Canandaigua, New York. The purpose of the review was to determine the validity of allegations related to providers providing care for which they were not credentialed and privileged. Coding accuracy and relates Veterans Equitable Resource Allocation funding. The allegations claim that a registered nurse and other VSN2 providers may have provided care to New York prison inmates beyond the scope for which they were credentialed and privileged, and 2, Vision 2 staff was coding the RN's incarcerated veteran sessions as psychotherapy treatments instead of psychoeducation in order to increase the Vision 2 budget. VA's funding system Verifunds psychotherapy treatment is approximately $40,000 per year per inmate, while psychoeducation non-intervention treatments are funded at approximately $100 per inmate per year. We concluded that the first allegation was partially substantiated. Vision 2 staff conducted a peer review, conducted the blah, 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 blah. You can read all this stuff. And this is incredible. The psychobabble bullshit that they did in this thing is absolutely transparent. It's transparent. And they go into the complex care groups and all of this stuff and how it was, we made a mistake. Well, if you made a mistake, you'd think from 1988 to 2000, you wouldn't catch an error between $40,000 per year per inmate versus $100 per year per inmate, and some crooked shit was not going on. Are you kidding me? I mean, come on. I feel like a lion on a train, smoke being blown up my ass. You can read all this stuff. It's just a bunch of psychobabble bullshit, just a bunch of double talk. But this is the end of the document. And this is my analysis of the document and how I blew this apart. The following analysis is accurate and true to the best of my knowledge, and for those things herein alleged, I believe it to be true. This analysis is a synopsis of an investigation and inquiries done by several veterans at Groveland Correctional Facility who were enrolled or involved with Veterans Residential Therapeutic Programs, VRTP. This analysis addresses only the allegation that was substantiated by the VA Inspector General, blah, 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 blah. Okay. And I signed and sealed this shit. I forget who I sent this to. Analysis of DVA IG report. Exhaustion of local remedy. 1D grievance WDE 17366-02 and WDE 19026-03. And if you don't believe those documents exist, you can Freedom of Information Act request to the Groveland Correctional Facility and find out for yourself. You can get the whole thing. I have transcribed the original documents verbatim into this file and added line numbers to this entire document to make locating a particular bit of text easier. In the wake of a flurry of complaints beginning in the spring 2000, from veterans incarcerated at Groveland Correctional Facility about bogus programs and uncredentialed counselors in the Veterans Residential Therapeutic Program, the Inspector General for the Department of Veterans Affairs in Washington, D.C., conducted an investigation that verified the complaints. I subsequently obtained a report 01-00290-22 and an attached memorandum from DVA IG under the Freedom of Information Act, Title 5 U.S.C. 552 from Richard Griffin, Esquire. The following is an analysis of the report that establishes that a registered nurse working for the Canandaigua, New York Veterans Administration had engaged in the unlicensed practice of psychiatry, according to DVA-IG report, with 12 incarcerated veterans for a period exceeding 1 year. Subsequent FOIL requests to the Department of Veterans Affairs and to the VA Medical Center on Bailey Avenue in Buffalo, New York, failed to disclose the name of the RN in question, i.e., to get the Veterans Administration to put it in writing. However, I believe the RN's name is Jim Robinson. I also attempted to ascertain the exact nature of the entries that were made in my medical records for 10 instances of outpatient care cited in an invoice I received from the Department of Veterans Affairs, and they have not responded to multiple requests for this information, which is my right to have. I have searched by FOIL and personally in my facility medical psychiatric records and have not discovered any entries that appear to have been made by the RN in question. I believe these records are Veterans Administration records, not DOCS records. I have filed several grievances cited above on this issue and have therefore exhausted all local remedy by attempting to resolve the issue of the invoices at the facility level, since the invoices were generated while I was incarcerated at Groveland Correctional Facility. The OCS in Albany refuses to accept responsibility for this action and disavows any knowledge or involvement with the RN cited in the OVA-IC report. They have responded to my grievance on this matter, and it is my responsibility to deal with the Veterans Administration on this matter. Allegation number 1. The RN did conduct psychotherapy treatments with incarcerated veterans for which he was not credentialed and privileged. A review of the RN's documentation and veterans' medical records found descriptions of treatments outside the scope of care for which he was credentialed and privileged. The RN had provided care to the same group of veterans on a weekly basis for over a year. Allegation number 2. Veterans Equitable Resource Allocation funds psychotherapy at approximately $40,000 per year per inmate, whereas psych education treatments are funded at $100 per year per inmate. The second allegation was written off as a coding error, primarily because none of the incarcerated veterans treated by the RN or the psychology technician were rated in the complex care pricing group. Therefore, their care was not funded at $40,000 per year per inmate as alleged. The contradiction here is not immediately apparent. However, we know this RN was preparing a paper trail to show that veterans were indeed undergoing psychotherapy. None of us were. In addition, some veterans, including myself, started getting invoices and threatening letters from the Department of Veterans Affairs billing us co-payments for multiple instances of outpatient care and demands for payment. Some of the invoices were over $600. Since the groundwork, the medical and psych records were prepared to show psychotherapy, something that the RN was not qualified to do, it is therefore inconceivable that the treatment provider made a coding error, since the record of the care he provided was not an error. The coding of the care provided and the documentation of the treatments in the veteran's medical records actually matched. It is more likely that this RN was impersonating a qualified psychotherapist and somehow would have had access to the money, approximately $480,000, perhaps by retroactively changing the rating of these vets to indicate eligibility for complex care in the pricing group, and getting paid via some nebulous to this deponent cost recovery through the Department of Correctional Services. That Groveland Correctional Facility, if not DOCS, was involved, there can be no question, since the question that never arose in the DVA Inspector General's report must be asked. How does a registered nurse, male, working in the Veterans Administration get onto state property run by the Department of Corrections without DOCS checking his credentials? How does this same man get access to veterans' medical records without their knowledge or permission and avoid being exposed as a fraud for over a year? Actually, it was from 1988 until 2000 when the inmates caught him. And the person who wrote this is absolutely correct. The Inspector General's report reveals that the veteran's medical records had descriptions of treatments outside the scope of care for which he was credentialed, and also that the RN sessions were coded as psychotherapy treatments rather than psych education treatments. That coding was done by the RN in question. No evidence that the visit to VA regional office staff was involved. And brackets are mine. In other words, treatments recorded in the medical records and the coding of those treatments were consistent with each other and done by the RN in question. The DVA-IG report calls the coding of these treatments coding errors throughout the report. Particularly, there are pronounced errors in visit procedures and coding. This is a non sequitur. If the treatment provider had documented psychotherapy in the medical records of a dozen veterans and had actually rendered such treatments, it is malpractice. When he correctly codes his sessions as such, it is no error, since DOCS at Groveland Correctional Facility never verified his credentials, and in fact, the counselors on staff had represented him as a specialist in post-traumatic stress disorder and as a psychologist from the Canandaigua Veterans Administration. The coding, therefore, was not erroneous, it was fraudulent. DOCS at Groveland Correctional Facility is negligent as well as liable, and obviously was involved in a well-planned criminal enterprise until 4 veterans known as the V Team started to do legal research and ask questions. In addition, the Veterans Health Administration had changed its policy in October 1999. Quote, expressly excluded by regulation hospital and outpatient care for a veteran who is a patient in an institution of another government agency, end quote. It therefore follows that 10 occurrences of, quote, outpatient care recorded on the cost recovery invoices I received from the Department of Veterans Affairs attached to Wendy grievance number 17366-02 were against VHA's own policy since I was incarcerated. Somehow this error also managed not to be detected for over a year, possibly longer. Multiple FOIA requests for a copy of the entries made in my medical records from the Department of Veterans Affairs and the VA Medical Center on Bailey Avenue in Buffalo, New York, went unanswered. I checked both of my medical and psych records, prison records, and discovered no entries that appeared to have been made by the RN in question. Exhaustion of local remedy. As regards the invoices for outpatient care that I received from the Department of Veterans Affairs, I have now exhausted local remedy by filing a grievance at Wendy Correctional Facility. Denied the grievance in November of 2002. DOCS disavows any knowledge of or culpability for the invoices that were incurred while I was incarcerated at Groveland Correctional Facility and enrolled in the Veterans Residential Therapeutic Program, under whose auspices the RN in question was operating. I had never had any dealings with the Veterans Administration for medical or psychiatric treatment prior to my incarceration at Groveland Correctional Facility. The denial is in the face of DVA-IG's investigation, which, despite denials by DOCS officials in Albany, investigations did indeed find improprieties as alleged in the VRTP program. On March 5, 2003, I have filed another grievance from Wendy Correctional Facility pertaining to the VA RN being allowed on DOCS property and allowed to play shrink for over a year without any verification of his credentials. For this allegation, I have proof from the DVA Inspector General. This grievance was sent to Groveland from Wendy Correctional Facility by the IGRC at Wendy. Groveland has denied the grievance, saying that it was filed untimely. However, the injury was not discovered, nor could it be realistically proven without the DVA-IG report, which was concluded on October 31, 2001, and that by that time I was already off the facility due to bogus tickets written in retaliation for being part of the team that initiated the DVA-IG investigation. I have also filed a criminal complaint with the New York State Police on February 10, 2003, which was forwarded to DOCS Inspector General. The Captain David McNulty of the Criminal Division Bureau on about February 21st, 2003. In this complaint, it was also alleged that DOCS at Groveland Correctional Facility, along with the Parole Board, had conspired to hold veterans incarcerated by the Parole Board's ability to arbitrarily and capriciously deny parole, despite the issuance of earned eligibility certificates to a vast majority of the participants. On March 27, 2003, I was interviewed by DOCS Inspector General Senior Investigator Thomas R. Todd. He took my statement and gave me file number 288-03 for his investigation into this matter. I had subsequently sent him copies of this document, the DVA IG report, and all materials to support allegations made herein. So this is what we're dealing with. This has been going on for a very long time. The people who were involved, to my knowledge, have never been prosecuted, and they're probably still at it under another name with some other scam. And this is not only confined to New York, not only to one prison in New York, probably to every prison in New York, probably to every prison in the whole freaking country. And this is a travesty. This is it's unconscionable, unconscionable. And this is a very well-written article. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, put it on my website. I had to because I was part of that investigation. Thank you for listening, my friends. This is Dave from Net4 Truth USA. Peace. Please subscribe to our backup channel, Whirlwind Revolt. Listen to chapters from my new book, Work in Progress, by the same title. The link is in the description section.